districts?
7.
7 districts combine that team, so, to make that team. One other quick thing, I want to mention Mr. Rafi.
Yep.
Right, so, not necessarily announcement, but if anybody's noticed, we've been one trustee light for a few months now. Raphael Flippin has indicated his willingness to, or his desire to resign. He has had a career change, and I believe he's moving out of district. So, we just have not been able to get together with him to actually receive his letter of recommendation, resignation. So, but I felt like this many absences warranted a comment from the board. I'm sure we will get that letter of resignation soon. I don't want the board to have to vote on a removal because it's just weird and that's not really what it is. So we want to thank Mr. Flippin for his services. For those that don't know, the Board of Education has 3 options. We can appoint somebody, we can hold a special election, or we can leave the seat vacant. And the board has decided on the latter, we'll leave the seat vacant until the next election. Mr. Flippin's term ended this year, so whoever takes that spot will get a full term. It won't be an abbreviated term. So just so everybody knows, and that's out there, I felt like it was important to let the community know that. So, did I miss anything?
No, except that he, is now in law enforcement, so I want to congratulate him on his new post. He's had to move upstate, and that's why he's out of district. So I just want to congratulate him publicly. He feels badly about his absences, but he was pursuing his dreams and attended the academy, and he graduated, so he's now working upstate. So I wish him well.
Yeah, and he let us know that from the very beginning, and we just said, well, don't resign, maybe you will, because he didn't know where he'd be stationed. There was a chance that he would resume his duties, but it was really kind of up in the air. So they were excused absences. Now he's indicated that he's not going to be in the community members, so he will resign. Okay, that's it. Moving on to, do we have any cards for public commentary? I don't think there's any of the public here. I think everybody works here. All right, budget presentation.
Yep.
You're up.
Can we go get those students back so they can watch the
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we wouldn't want them to miss this. Riveting.
No
Anytime I make
no
comments
fun
like
and games
that,
in this room.
Mr. Gee gets very offended because he loves spreadsheets.
It's all okay.
Jen, it's edge of your seat stuff, I tell you. What's gonna happen next?
All right, take care.
Oh.
You really are.
Even board members don't want to be here anymore.
Lord, sit down.
Yeah, the old I have homework excuse.
Uh-huh.
You're a senior, you don't have homework, who we kidding?
All right, so this brings us to our budget presentation. This is our 3rd presentation, which that's basically an expenditure review. That's the 3 specific budget lines, which is administration, transportation, and unallocated. Again, just to go over timeline, this is our 3rd budget presentation scheduled. One of the things I want to emphasize is that it's still early in the budget process, and on April 2nd, 2025 is when we finally give our final sort of budget proposal, and we see where we actually land as we keep chipping away at budgeting. This culminates, obviously, in the budget adaptation on April 23rd, with our budget hearing on May 7th, and then May 20th will be our budget vote and trustee election. In between the budget adoption on April 23rd, I will be taking the show on the road and hopefully presenting to our different groups and organizations to try to inform them on what our budget contains. Again, we're in February. This is the time we really start looking at staffing, full-time equivalents, and looking at program requests, trying to decipher wants and needs and see where we land. So the essential questions for today is what guides district accounting. Those are generalized accepted accounting principles. So all of our accounting is based on a nationally normed sort of procedure. What funds are used to pay for our expenditures that we'll talk about? Everything comes from the general fund. There's a big kind of a misconception that we have multiple sort of funds, but the general fund contains all the money that we sort of use to cover our revenues, I should say, to cover our expenditures. And what do the budget codes mean? Again, they mean the revenue source, and the revenue source is always going to be in large part, the function, the option, and the location. In terms of what expenditures are included in 1000 code, that's administration. That's all the sort of funds associated with the general administration and operation of the school district. This does not include teachers and salaries like that. This is all administrative costs. It includes transportation. Transportation includes transportation A to Z, athletics, field trips, and the day-to-day transportation that we provide our students. And finally, what expenditures are included in the 9000 code unallocated. And those are all costs associated with employee entitlements and benefits, debt payments, and governmental obligations. So that's the least glamorous, I would say, of them all. In terms of administrative and general support, basically this include costs or expenditures associated with the Board of Education, district clerk, and our annual budget vote and election. The central administration, which includes my office, our supplies and conferences, our business office, human resources, legal and public information, that's legal counsel, public relations, and related BOCEC services, operations and maintenance, including staff, equipment, utilities, conferences, and BOCEC services, central planning and data, again, equipment, postage, and then insurance and associated costs. So basically, it's basically everything that we do to administer the school district or to run the school district. So when we look at year-to-year analysis, we're looking at a pretty substantial increase in terms of our records management. That's basically just a correction. If you're looking at 1460 records management, you notice there was $0 budgeted in 24-25, and there'll be $65,000 budgeted for the subsequent year. This is basically to digitize all of our records. So in the event of a natural calamity, and I experienced this in my former district, we lost a lot of transcripts and public records. We're moving so that we digitize everything. And sometimes when people request transcripts from, and this really happens from the 1970s and 80s, it's hard to find those documents, and sometimes they've been sort of aged. So we're in the process that will be completed next year to digitizing all of our records. Moving forward, documents are already digital. The increase in security, which is 1692, is basically a year-to-year analysis. So we're just kind of updating that line. It doesn't necessarily represent additional costs, but more like an adjustment so that we look at the actual costs. And unallocated, sorry, this is advancing by itself. Unallocated insurance, that was a pretty substantial increase, 1920, and that's because when they made an assessment of our property and our assets, they came in at a higher value, which in turn made our insurance go up by about 23%. So those are the most notable increases in this sort of section of our budget that I kind of wanted to highlight, and then I'll summarize exactly what percentage the increase is in a later slide. Transportation, again, includes all the budget lines for student transportation costs, including the salaries associated with transportation, contract services, transportation to our district schools, BOCES programs, special education programs, private schools, charter schools, athletics, and field trips. When we look at the various codes within, and we summarized it, the biggest thing that stands out, I want to point out first, let me point out 5510, district transportation, are basically the costs associated with salaries and people who manage transportation. That is pretty stable in terms when you look at the year-to-year comparison. Contract transportation, we're seeing a pretty substantial increase. This is due to an RFP. We're in the RFP process, and this transportation cost is being pretty much universal across the district because of higher expenditures in terms of fuel and bus maintenance, bus driver salaries. So we're seeing an anticipated almost 9% increase just in that one expenditure line. Athletics doesn't have that monumental increase, but this is basically a separate contract that could be extended if needed, but this represents all transportation to our sporting events for our athletes. Again, if seasons go longer than anticipated, that's when we sometimes contemplate extending it, but we feel like it's pretty stable considering the year-to-year. And then the 5546 is a line where we allocate funds to offset the cost of like grade level trips, making it more equitable for our students. In large part, this includes our middle school trips. Each grade level does a special trip, and so we try to subsidize those trips for our students, again, to give more students access. When you look at the increase, really the largest increase in those lines is the contract transportation, which is our day-to-day transportation, and which we are in the RFP process. Unallocated is a little harder to understand. First, it goes over governmental obligations. That's retirement system, Social Security, Medicare tax, FICA, workers' comp, and unemployment insurance. Employee benefits that include life, disability, dental, health insurance, Medicare reimbursements, insurance opt-outs, all these things that sort of fall under that. And then debt service and special aid, which includes our serial bond principal and interest, tax revenue, anticipation notes, interest, and transfers to food service fund and special aid fund that we use to offset expenses. The transfer to food service fund is, again, The governor has proposed universal free meals for everyone. At this point, we have it covered by the federal government. We don't know where that's gonna be, so we still allocate some funds for that in case we need them. When you look at a year-to-year comparison, basically the largest increase is gonna be in 90/60, which is our health insurance. This year, we had an unanticipated increase of 5% mid-year of our health insurance costs, and it's projected that we're gonna have an additional 10% increase for the next fiscal year. And that, when you look at that line, 90/60, that's the most substantial increase. It goes from about $19 million and change to $22 million and change. So that's another relatively large increase. Everything else is pretty much within just the cost of living expenses going up. So if you look at these three budget codes, these percentage change only represent those line items. This only represents about 50% of our overall budget, and I keep emphasizing, and the percent change, again, only applies to those budget lines. So when you look at, this thing's advancing by itself, like transportation, we're seeing almost a 15% increase, which is pretty substantial. And then in the 9,000, which includes the health insurance, because it's a larger portion, that's a pretty substantial increase. On average, in the last few years, when we're at this point in our budget presentations, we're looking at somewhere between a 3 and 4% increase in these codes. So obviously at 7.21, it's a little bit larger. But again, I want to emphasize that we're still in the beginning of this process. These numbers will change. Not they may change, they will change. This is where we're at currently. In our next budget presentation, we'll be talking about the 200 code, which is one of the biggest codes we have. That's curriculum and instruction. We'll see where that lands, and then we'll continue this process. Again, we're proposing a budget and an expenses and revenue update on April 2nd. So going back to the tax cap and where we're at, again, before we sort of solidify where our tax levy maximum will be, we presented the board with two scenarios. Scenario A yields a tax cap of 3.48%. Again, this tax cap is based on an 8-point formula that's mandated by the state. It's not something that we have any leeway in. But that tax cap does not include an inter-fund transfer to capital. If we keep that line in, that raises the tax cap, not our proposed tax levy, but our tax cap to 4.92%. That includes $1 million interfund transfer to capital. What that $1 million interfund transfer capital allows us to do is engage in capital work without a capital reserve vote. So we can do ongoing capital improvements, which we know we need on an ongoing basis. We do have to indicate to the public what we intend to spend $1 million on. So in some ways, they do vote on it, so I don't want to mislead the public or the board in saying that we're just getting free reign to do whatever we want with $1 million. But that allows us to do it immediately should the budget be approved. Again, clarification, the tax levy limit does not represent the district's proposed tax levy. Again, we'll have a limit that's either going to be 3.48 or 4.92. And then we'll continue on the budget process and propose our proposed tax levy at the end of that process. I always like emphasizing this, the budget process functions independently of the tax levy limit. Again, we need to sort of fund the programs that we need and we feel are important to us. And in scenario A, if we choose to go in that scenario and not include this transfer to capital line for $1 million, we also have the option of having a capital reserve vote. We have about $4 million in our newly established capital reserve that we can use for capital improvements as well. So the recommendation from the administration at this point is perhaps to consider scenario A and the capital reserve vote. And at this point, I want to open it up for discussion from our trustees. That kind of concludes my presentation. I'll go back to that slide. But again, March 5th, we'll talk about curriculum instruction, which is an important part of our budget, and then followed by our staffing analysis, and then on April 2nd is when we finally give kind of where we're landing with a budget proposal finalized by April 23rd. And again, the vote will be May 7th. The budget hearing, which is sort of a final presentation of the budget and our budget vote and election on May 20th. So I know we're going to have questions or discussion regarding just basically our two scenarios that we sort of discussed with the board, and I want to open it up to questions or discussion. Yes.
Just a quick question, which is kind of basic, and I should probably know the answer to. Given scenario A and scenario B, that is the anticipated tax cap. Does that mean that the tax levy under scenario B will necessarily be higher than the tax levy under scenario A, or
Yeah.
not?
Yeah.
It does.
3.48 versus 4.92.
No, but that's the tax cap. I'm talking about what the ultimate tax levy is.
Got it.
Based on our initial,
Oh.
looking, and that's a great
Yeah.
question, yeah,
So what you're recommending is that we go with scenario A, avoid the transfer of capital, and go with the lower anticipated tax cap
correct. And
at this point.
I would recommend proposition to use our capital reserves,
Right.
because we don't want to give up on continual capital improvements. I think they're much needed. I do think we need to get into a discussion about a bond. You know, our buildings are, you know, aging, and they're not aging well. So over the last couple of years, I'm proud of the work we've done so far. We've passed 2 capital reserve votes that amount to about $6 million worth of capital work that thankfully we'll be breaking ground in several of those projects this summer. Our first transfer to capital line yielded some work as well. And our last transfer capital line basically allowed us to do some of the auditorium renovations that we're hoping to break ground in the summer and have complete for next year. We're also doing the energy performance contract. We're very close to finalizing that. That's about $9 million worth of work. So we are engaging in capital work, still in the plotting process, but as soon as we start breaking ground, you know, the hope is that not only do our buildings and facilities get better and the updates that they need, we'll start generating building aid. And the reason we're sort of, you know, having to manage financial challenges is because we've lost a lot of that building aid. We want to start generating some more aid as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I wanted to ask a question also. So, you know, in terms of scenario A and scenario B, how does that affect our situation in terms of the next year's fiscal, or next year's tax cap and as well?
So that's a great question. It's hard to say because we don't know where we're going to land with like state aid and where the formula is going to be. So it's hard for me to answer the question. So basically, when you add the $1 million transfer, interfund transfer to capital line, it doesn't allow us to spend more money on operations. That's totally dedicated to capital improvements. So, you know, the base is increased, so when you have a bigger base, you know, then the levy is sort of, you know, and I don't want to like, you know, misword because I haven't done the math. But it's hard to anticipate where we're going to be based upon a lot of factors.
So are you saying, can I just add to that point, just 1 second? So are you saying then that if we went for the 4.92 and we had the $1 million in the transfer capital fund, right? You're saying that next year, that $1 million is not on top of our budget where our increase will be, right? You're saying that money, I thought you said to me today that is netted out of next year's levy.
I don't think it is.
I don't think so either, that's why I'm confused. What I'm trying to say is, and I think what Joe's getting at is, and where I've felt and where I've had this conversation with you is, as much as it's painful to have the higher levy, right, we're not breaching the cap, okay?
Right.
We're not looking for a 60 point, we're not over, this is our levy. So if we do not put the extra $1 million in for the capital improvements, right, next year's budget is built off the smaller number. If it's in there, we're building off an extra $1 million. So my point is, and like I said before, because a couple of years ago, when the budget cliff was highlighted, okay, I didn't agree with it, but the administration put a number out to the media, which was a smaller number. And I don't like raising taxes on anybody any more than anybody else's. It affects me too, right? I don't like paying them and everything else. But if people are gonna come into our schools and say, we need these improvements, and why does the bathrooms look like this, and why doesn't the field have this, and why does the track need to be replaced, why was the turf field the way it is? People understand we have to spend money to do that. So if we go to 4.92 and the $1 million is in there, it's money that the taxpayers are gonna have to put into this district at some point in the future anyway. Whether it's through a bond or it's right now. So I personally believe that if we have a conversation with the community and we have clear-cut communications, there's no reason we can't get a 4.92 approved, right? And I think if we explain what it's for and how it's being used, and it's not just paying people, we're not just spending it, these are capital improvements, and it needs to happen. Our buildings are falling apart, and we're holding certain things together. And I think we all understand that.
And it's a cap, the second part
No,
of
it
what I was
does,
trying to
yeah,
say
'cause the
is
base
not
is
only
bigger.
that, those projects can also be state aidable that will benefit us in the longer run.
Exactly, so the revenue-
And it's a smarter use of our money, from that standpoint, so.
And it
that's
puts our floor up, so we're
Yeah.
building off of that each year as opposed to undercutting ourselves right now, which is what happened under the last budget that under Dr. Gianni, where it came in low.
And again, we don't anticipate piercing any cap.
Right.
Correct.
So, but again, the reluctance from us is just a tax levy that might be an outlier. And that's why I wanted to have a
And I
conversation
like-
and explain exactly what they represent.
And let's face it, it also comes down to receiving less in aid from the state. So, there is also that support that I believe our community is aware of, that is a challenge that is out there as well, so.
Yeah, so like,
Those-
But I'm thinking too, to make a recommendation about scenario A or B right now, I think is premature, because we haven't heard yet what we're gonna need for our teaching staff.
Well, this is a correction. We need to submit it by March 1st.
gotta go to the state Friday.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why it's timely. And I
We have to make this decision tonight as a
Right.
board, 3.48 or 4.92.
But if we made the decision tonight, let's say scenario B, can we change our mind later?
Friday, no, unless we're having an emergency meeting.
No, I mean, you've got a deadline for reporting to the state.
So the question
What if
is,
when we finish the budget, we say we don't want the 4.92, we want something different, can we change it?
let me, point of clarification. So the 4.2 just represents the cap, not the levy. The issue is that for that cap to exist, the $1 million has to be in there, so that we can't pull or remove the $1 million transfer capital line.
Why wouldn't we put it in now for reporting to the state? We'll get our report next week about teaching and learning. And then you'll be able to give us a follow-up about recommendation about what it's really gonna take to run the district. And if we don't need it all, we don't need it all, but we've already covered ourselves by having it reported to the state. That would be the maximum that we're looking to go to. We can always
As I said,
go
the whole
do it
thing though
less.
is, correct me if I'm wrong, I may be,
Right.
these are capital things that are not affected by,
No, that part
the
is
basic
true.
budget.
However, until we see the entire picture, I don't think we're in a position to decide between the two. I see it as erring on the side of caution of putting scenario B in for purposes of reporting to the
So it's a good
state.
question. If we reported it at scenario B by Friday, can we change our mind and go back to A at a later date?
I don't immediately know the answer to that question. I don't know, Ms. Amy Holtz?
Not off the top of my head, I believe what you report is your good faith reporting to the state.
Yeah, I can't imagine anybody's gonna yell at you for actually going out less, but I think we can tackle that. I'd really like to hear and get the temperature from the board, and I think I have an understanding on how they feel about scenario A versus scenario B.
Can I just ask one question before we hear, and I don't know if Mr. Gee has the answer to this question. Can the transfer capital line be removed after we submit the tax cap to the state?
I have to look into that. I don't know if we can change the tax limit once I submit it. I have to look into that.
That's what I think we need to find out, but if
But
I'm,
even if we can't change the limit, can we not then change
The budget,
the levy?
right.
Right, what I'm
If
saying
if
is,
we've got our cap at whatever it is, 4.6, I just lost that.
Mine too.
If we've got our cap at that and we include this transfer of capital, the $1 million transfer of capital, and we've got our cap at the higher number, can we not, after looking at the specifics that Ann was talking about staffing, et cetera, can we not then determine that our levy can actually be lower than expected?
theoretically, yes, based on the
Probably
trends
not.
and increased costs,
Yep,
probably not.
okay.
My feeling right now, inclination is if we go with scenario B, we're gonna be proposing a tax levy that's gonna be close to that 4.92%.
Gotcha.
And it's a hard decision, listen.
It's a tough decision, but like I said, if you really look at the history and with careful communication and conversation with the public, I think people should be reasonable and understand again, whatever the levy is really kind of determines what it really means to everybody's wallet at the end of the day. So, I don't know, does anybody else have any comments they wanna make on, you know, scenario A versus scenario B, where you're leaning, what you'd prefer to do, because we need to make this decision tonight.
As I say, I think-
Yeah, I'm leaning towards scenario B.
B,
I'm on B too.
yeah.
Those three reasons are without a doubt the reason why.
You're for B, right?
Scenario
I'm for B.
Absolutely.
Ms. Felice?
You were B?
Yes.
Okay. I'm less likely to go with B. I'm okay with B if we don't end up right at B and we end up with something less than B. I'm okay with B is if we can come in less than B. Because the scenario that's out there right now, we don't know where we're gonna end up with all the other taxes that are out there. Right now, everybody is very sensitive to where we're gonna come in with what kind of taxes that are, that we're going to be faced with the price of gas, with the price of groceries. Everybody is very sensitive to the cost of living right now. And we don't need to add to that. The newsletter that we started producing hit the mailboxes today. So I think that's going to be well received, and I think that's a step in the right direction, the communication that we missed out on last year. So I was happy to see that, and I think it's going to present for good communication. But I got to tell you, I'm really concerned about going anything towards 5%. You know, 4.92. You know, several years ago, we were in, you know, when we had that other higher number, it was very concerning. When you first talked about the 3.48, you know, as in scenario A, I was comfortable with that number, and I thought that number would easily sell. I'm not so sure about the other. But as long as we can go something lower than that, I think that would be more palatable.
In response to that, you remember scenario B doesn't give us that much wiggle room because the increase in percentage is the $1 million. The difference between the
It's the transfer of
3.48
capital, it's not a.
And that's not, we can't play with that. If that's approved, we can't use a higher tax levy to, for example, finance our operations. So that's a concern. So it's gonna be in the fours. I can pretty confidently say the tax levy that we'll propose is gonna be.
So then you're not really accomplishing much more with scenario B, but for that $1 million.
Do more capital work and to not take it out of the capital reserve fund, which is gonna be money, that's my thing. That $1 million is gonna come from the taxpayers either now or in a bigger bond at some point in the future, or next year, the capital reserve, a vote or a budget or whatever else it is. If we're able to go up to that point without breaching the cap, then I'm for it. I understand it's gonna take careful, and I get all of what you're saying, Ms. Felice, I really do. It's not easy right now, but who knows what's coming. But I do wanna hear from Mr. Lillo, though, on your thoughts on it.
I'm leaning towards B. I mean, the money has to be there, and as much as I don't want to do anything with raising taxes, the schools need it. They need that flexibility to have that $1 million to keep the projects that we have going.
And if we
And
continue to
keep the
push it
buildings
down the
going.
road, yeah.
And
sorry.
again, I agree with Mr. Barry, where it's concerned if we do not address it now, it's just gonna hit bigger in future years.
And I think we have consensus that it's scenario B.
Right.
What do you have earmarked for that $1 million? Do you have anything earmarked
So
for it?
already we're looking at, you know, and I hate, you know, it's not all about athletics, but our track it's getting almost to the point where it's unsafe to use. We're looking at creating a space for our life skills students at the high school that's more appropriate for their program. Right now, they're just kind of a mishmash in the classroom that we make it work. The idea of perhaps improving some of our science classrooms, those are the things that we have sort of contemplating at this point.
When is the auditorium getting done?
So it's up in the
Summer.
queue. Again, our expectation is to break ground in late summer, but to have it complete by the winter.
It's a useful use of term because it does appear to be a breakdown at the auditorium.
So,
Quite sad.
listen,
But that's also separate.
that is a legislative priority every year with the advocacy groups, more so this year than I've seen in years past, is to, in some way, get the state to do something to speed up the approval process.
One of the things we're
Because
also
It's getting pretty bad.
working on is, what is the impact on the average household? And so that's hard to like, it's really complicated because when you look at the impact, it's based on your assessed value of your, not your market value, but your assessed value. And
Were
we
you
felt
able
like,
to come up with that?
Hmm?
Were you able to come up with
We
that?
looked at certain
roundabout
preliminary
figure?
numbers based on like a $500,000 house has an assessed value of $3,000. I have no idea how that works. But that's basically assessed value. So in that scenario, the difference between, for someone who may own a $500,000 house, again, assessed value, not, I'm sorry, $3,000 assessed value. That's generally, we picked like a $500,000 sort of market value as an example. Annually, the difference is somewhere between $90 in the 3.48 scenario or $130 annually in the 4.9.
So you're getting about $40 a year for the average size home in the community.
The difference
Per
between
thousand,
A and
per
B.
thousand.
Huh?
Is it per thousand or
Is that per
Oh,
thousand?
that's, I'm sorry, that's per thousand of your assessed value, correct?
So for a $500,000 house, it's $120 increase per year. You just said that was,
If it's 3,000, yeah.
yeah, what you just said was on a $500,000 house. So on a $500,000 house, your increase in school taxes, the difference is going to be $120 a year. Correct? $10 a month.
Between those two,
Between the difference between scenario A and scenario B is $120 annually increase if your home is assessed roughly $500,000.
Looking at initially at our numbers, correct. When you say per 1,000, that means for 3,000, it's triple the number?
Yeah, that's what I just did, right? you
So
said
90
$3,000.
times 3 would be,
No.
No, it's not 90, it's 40 times 3, because it's the difference between A and B is $40.
Yes.
Right, you just-
We need to have
Sorry.
those
Yeah,
numbers.
So the
90
difference-
more.
I was afraid, when I heard it, I heard you say the
I'm
difference
excuse-
is
yeah, I'm sorry, doing
$120.
this. We're talking about the difference,
Of
scenario A to
$120.
B.
Correct.
B costs $500,000, an average home of $500,000, $120 a year. That's the difference, more
The difference
than
is
scenario
$40.
A.
and again, very initial
$40
calculations.
assessed value.
No, $40 times 3, because the assessed value is $3,000 on a $500,000 house.
The cost per $1,000 is $87 for scenario A, $126 for scenario B, per thousand, so you have to multiply that by 3.
And an assessed value is $3,000 on a $500,000 house.
So let's just do the cost then. Scenario B is how much of an increase per year
About
for a
$300,000.
$500,000
About
house?
$360.
$360, okay.
Do we know the average assessed value of a home in our district?
We do not at this point.
Just curious, I didn't think you knew it. Okay.
3,000
We
seems
should
low.
have those numbers.
What's that?
I think
3,000
3,000
seems
seems
low.
low.
Well, it seems
No, I-
low for the immediate area. It might be
I
maybe not for
did
the
look
entire
at
district.
different houses, I mean, there were many that were around $3,000.
Meaning their home value was $500,000.
500 or 6, like, so 3,000, it could be 3,100, you know, in that.
Yeah,
in
no,
that
understood,
range,
but
yeah.
we're still saying that
Right.
a $500,000 house is still $3,000,
Right,
right?
so like a
So
house that
600,000 is a little, it's a little
Right.
less. That's what I'm trying to figure out, is the average home value in our community 300,000? Is it 700,000? That's what I'm trying to get at, you know, and that kind of matters in the conversation. I would be willing to guess that it is somewhere between 400,000 and 500,000, right? Based on real estate right now? I would have to think, I think 4 is conservative, I think 5 is probably a little high.
I don't know if you'd average, it depends on.
There's
We
a
have-
lot
we
of
have a very
factors,
big
right?
discrepancy
Well,
in
honestly, if you
terms
look
of-
at
We
real
have a
estate,
very
This is a
unique-
difficult
no,
one.
this
You
is
should
probably,
guess that.
exactly, that's why I asked the question if we knew it, because it is very unique, right? There's $10 million mansions on the water and,
Right.
you know.
And
some
and that's why,
neighborhoods.
that's the danger of working in averages, because the
Yeah.
averages don't really point, you know, because you have outliers.
But we
I
really
still
need,
struggle with
and,
those
you know, we
numbers.
really need to concern ourselves with the average of our
Correct.
voters.
Right.
Right, which, you know, who's in school, who's here, and things like that. So, and that's who, and I'm concerned, and listen, the concern for raising taxes on lower income families is really where I'm really more concerned, but when we look at scenario A to B, it only shrinks as the home value goes down as to what that difference
Right.
really is. So, it's not $120 a year for somebody who's in a house that's assessed at $300,000, it's less. So, and when we start talking about those numbers, in my opinion, it gets a little bit more manageable when you look at the increases that we're faced with every day that are different. Like, if my oil costs only went up $120 this year, I'd be pretty happy. Okay, but it's probably going up that a month, right, so, anyway. Okay, so you have consensus at scenario B.
All right.
Nobody wants to raise taxes, but.
It's some popular thing, I hate to do it, but like I said,
I
if
think
not,
we also want to have this district running in tip-top shape if we can get it there.
And the difference is capital improvements
Right.
that are desperately needed as well.
Correct. There's a lot of, yeah, there's things that need a lot of, I'll use a euphemism, TLC, tender loving care.
and bond planning needs to start on May 21st.
Absolutely.
Like, I don't think we can really just, avoid the
This is
conversation
action.
and start the process,
No, I
because,
think we've been talking about it for too long.
yeah, well, I mean, I think COVID disrupted it, obviously, that was the time to do it, and then the budget cliff and the realization of what happened during that, and it's gonna be hard, but I think the challenges to this board, this administration is, how do we have better and clearer communication with our community on this? Because if people are upset, they're not coming to the board meeting, we know that, nobody comes and listens to the board presentations, the budget presentations, they're the least attended meetings of the year, right? Who's gonna let us come talk to them? How are we gonna do that? How are we gonna invite people in differently? Do we do a workshop, on a Saturday at some point in the next month or two and try to answer questions and have a town? I don't know what the answer is, but I think that's gonna be a big undertaking if this is,
So along those lines, I think we have to be very aggressive when we do our budget roadshows. I think a month from now is still early in the process. I think once we adopt the budget, we really have to do our due diligence and try to reach out to every civic organization.
we need to start reaching out sooner than when we're done though.
Making those appointments now, but. I
Make
wouldn't
the
have
appointments now and
meetings
say, who
until-
wants to see, can we go on a Saturday afternoon to the middle school auditorium or the Boys and Girls Club and say, hey, come in, here's a cup of coffee and a bagel, let's talk budgeting, let's let you understand what's happening and why this is. I mean, we really need to see what the reaction is for the community, we may have support right off the bat. My feeling is, as long as we're not breaching the cap,
Right.
I really think there's gonna be a couple of murmurs, but I think it'll be over at that point,
But
but
I do think those meetings should happen after we adopt the final budget.
the conversation should happen, I'm just saying schedule it sooner than later before people.
No, I would want to schedule it now for
Yeah.
dates in April,
Yeah.
so that at least we
We
know.
all know the
dates.
dates,
Yep.
they're up there on every budget
It's,
presentation.
it's March, so,
Yeah.
we gotta start planning, okay. Does anybody have any other questions? I have two specific questions, the first one, I did wanna understand on the first slide early on, what is driving, I know you said security was year-to-year comparison, but that's a little, I don't know, what, is it people, is it overtime, is it salaries?
It's more people and a more accurate, sort of, budgeting for what our security costs have been. We've been looking at it the last 2 years, we've been doing some transfers there, so this higher number is a better, accurate representation of people. It's not necessarily overtime, it's just.
So you're saying we've been under budgeting this line, or going too close to it?
Under budgeting, I would say.
Okay.
Which line?
Security, which was in 1622 on slide 6. If we need more security, we need more security. It's a 20% jump in a big line that, like, I don't know, a lot of years security always comes up, right? We've cut, we've added, what do we really need? And, if we needed it, what's happening now that it's detrimental that we need more? Like, are we not getting coverage? Are we having issues with lack of security?
So we're not adding security. This is more a budgetary adjustment versus adding additional expenses.
Because we didn't budget enough for the salaries of who we have.
Correct.
Okay, got it. Nope, understood. But we did that a while ago. That's
So
what,
this is to reallocate and get salaries to be
Right.
comparable really with other districts?
No, it's our own budgeting. We didn't budget sufficiently for it, we're just adjusting it so it's more accurate.
the other question I have was on the district transportation line. That there was an increase that was slide 8, 1510. How many people does that number encompass?
Those are like bus monitors, those, anybody.
Oh, that's, okay, I thought that was like district staff
There's
that,
also a portion of Mr. Gee's salary,
Nope.
which is
Okay.
aidable,
Aidable.
so we take a portion of that salary. put in
got it, so that's why I was gonna ask that question. So a portion of this is for your salary, but it also includes the bus monitors and such like that. It's not our people in central office that manage the bus company outside of Ms. McGee because it's aidable. Thank
So
you.
we take a portion of our salary. All this, by the way, is in the detail that we gave to you in the update.
Mhm.
So what we did, just for in terms of brevity, this is basically the main ideas, and I'll share the detail again tomorrow's update, but that's broken line by line, so you see exactly what it is.
Got it. And then, the transportation increase of, $1.6 million, $1.7 million, whatever that number is, what is the bus company telling us is the reason for the increase?
Overall, it increases in expenditure. Some school districts are looking at 20% increases. It's something that's kind of rampant across the island. Has nothing to do with electric buses, I don't believe.
No, I understand that, but are they giving us a reason saying you're going up because fuel costs, salaries, insurance, maintenance? Are they giving you a reason for that? Because
So
that's
right
a
now,
big jump.
It's still early in the process, so we have a consultant actually looking at it, and working with us so that we can respond to the initial estimates.
Okay,
So we don't
so-
know that we're gonna land there, that again can change, but that's what we're guessing it's gonna be.
Because, I don't know, and I think we talked about it, I've been for the most part satisfied with the bus company compared to some of the issues we've had in years past. We certainly don't hear issues about them, right? That seems they're doing a good job. But that's a big jump, right? That's, I don't know, so it's over 10%, almost 15%, right? So,
9%.
what is it, 9%?
It's more than 9%.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, so, that's a big jump that's gotta be justified, in my opinion, to understand. I get things are going up, but things, not everything's going up 10, 15, 20%, right? Things are going up 2, 3, 4, 5%, whatever else it is. So that's kind of big, and I'd like to understand what it is, because it was funny, because I pick up every day at the high school, and my daughter actually said, she goes, look at those buses, man, there's nobody on them. And I know how we have to budget, and I know we have to have a number of buses, but maybe we need to start talking about combining routes, if that's the case, because we pay for
So
bus,
that's what
right?
the consultant's looking at, combining routes. We're also using more small buses for special needs kids. We had a pretty sizable increase in the use of the minibuses, which are just as costly as the big buses. But what we'll do is we'll put together a sort of like a report to provide the board that kind of chronicles what the increase represents.
And finally, what is in our contract? Don't we have, aren't the increases year to year in the contract? The percentages?
Well, the contract expired, so it's for 5 years. So now we had to go out for an RFP. So this is the new, that's why.
Okay, so I missed that part. I didn't realize that. When did we
Our
put?
contract's over, so we're getting a new contract now. So we went out for RFP. So that's where we're at.
Am I the only one that didn't know we went out for an RFP for busing?
I didn't know that
I
either.
did know that,
But
but I
I
don't know how I knew.
I just got my email.
Yeah.
That's kind of a big
Says
one
so
that-
right here.
Yeah, no, I get it
Okay,
here.
that's
but-
I know I read it.
No, but prior to tonight, I didn't know that. So what, so is this number, and I'm sorry, I'm dragging this now, because now I have more questions because I didn't know we were on an RFP for it. Is this the same company's bid?
Yeah. Town bus.
And they were the lowest bid amongst, how many bids did we get?
Everything only bid.
Bid fixing is rampant.
So, and we were very unhappy with sort of cross-contracting with Montauk Bus Company. We just had a lot of problems. Really, Tom is the best option.
Again, I think their service has been good in some of the issues we've had in the past. But listen, if I'm the salesperson on this account too, I certainly start adding things with my pencil too, if they're the only bidder.
And that's why we're working with a consultant.
Is the consultant gonna tell you they can charge whatever they want, they're the only one that bid?
No, but I think we sort of debate it out and we try to reduce costs where we can, or get around to these suggested.
If that's the case, I would like to, I'd love to see, I can't wait to see the consultant's report. I would like to explore, combining routes if our ridership really is that low, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's not.
The problem with the ridership is you have to provide routes for everybody who's eligible for a bus.
No, understood.
This comes up.
They use it.
No, I know that we have to do that, but, just look at the issue.
yeah.
Look what William Floyd did a couple years ago, which basically put Montauk East End out of business, but, they combined routes. If the kids aren't on, whatever, that's a big jump, and of course, it's gonna be a big jump because there's no competition, right? They can charge whatever they want. So, and I know we briefly talked about this, and I know this is a real Pandora's box, but we gotta start talking about doing little buses ourselves.
But that would be an exorbitant cost.
It'd be a huge bond. I get it.
But it's also the maintenance.
No, listen, I get it all. I
employees,
understand.
insurance.
Can I ask the question, how long is this RFP contract? 5 years?
well, you can renew it, you can extend it up to 5 years. So
Yeah.
this would be year one. We haven't put forth to the board yet
Right.
to approve it.
Yeah, no, I know, but, you know, does that impact the state, I forget what they call them, but the electric buses?
No.
I was gonna say, are they leaning toward that, because what is the year on that? It's not far.
2035.
Well, it,
Yeah, wait, it's
35 or
not
something.
even on. We're not doing electric buses.
And I don't
no,
think
but
it's
I,
gonna happen.
no, but you bring up a point, and I get it, but like, if year 2 or 3 of this contract, they have to all of a sudden start buying electric buses, our rate is gonna go up, or is it gonna be locked in for the 5 years?
We have the rate for each year. We have a rate set.
We'll have a contract.
There's nothing in the contract on there and that talks about electric buses.
I'll double check.
They're gonna go bankrupt, cause that's the next thing, right? If they have to go out and start spending, millions upon millions of dollars for buses.
Again, with all the legislative push against the bus mandate, I don't know that that's gonna happen.
We'll see. Okay.
Before we move off the budget, I'm just not satisfied with the understanding of the assessed value. So could we have something in writing to show,
Yeah,
all right, I need a better explanation of just what the levy and the tax cap represents, okay?
With the assessed
You
value of
understand it.
properties and assets or the tax levy?
Just what it's gonna translate to the taxpayer,
yeah.
on what we adopt, when we adopt it,
The impact on the taxpayer.
yeah.
On each home,
Got it.
based
Again,
on.
it has to be based on an average, or we could get.
Understood, that's fine, but what is
Yeah,
that? We need to
but
figure
what
that
it-
out.
what is it?
So I would like to know what that is, to Cheryl's point, and if we can get the average value of a home in our community, I would like to know that, but it's not imperative if it's hard to
Yeah,
come
well,
by.
that's how they come up with the average impact on the taxpayer.
And I just need to see it, I need it visually, not just told to us, okay?
When we had this discussion a few years ago, I thought that was something you got through the tax assessor's office.
It is. It's also on your tax bill, your assessed value is on your tax bill.
Yeah.
So
But
you
you'd have
can
to do
see.
it.
But it's the tax
Projection.
assessor
I
that
know what my
figures it
assessed
out
value is, I'm just trying to
and
get the
figures
average.
out what the average
I know that when we
cost
talk, we
is, so
understand
They
the
give us
average.
total.
they give you a total, and then you come up with the average, they come up with the average.
They give us the total.
Alright, so just to kind of do a recap, we're gonna try to figure out average cost of our houses in our community. We provide some details of the RFP and what they're sort of indicating the increases in costs are. I think those are the two major things.
I have an easy question.
Sure.
You've got digitizing student records in there. What about
Bless you.
district documents in general, like contracts and things like that? Or do we need to have that all digitized as well?
I'm not sure. That's a great question. I can't immediately answer that question. We have so many digital copies of contracts now, not the signed contracts, but obviously when we draft things, we communicate via email, so, I'll look into it.
Any other questions?
That's it. Thank you.
Does the board have any issue with me taking the next 3 sections together as an omnibus?
Not in the least.
I didn't think so.
Wonderful idea.
Thank you.
I just didn't know if anybody had anything on personnel,
I'm
so.
a huge fan.
All right.
That personal agenda was kind of
We'll
innocuous.
just look over the next 3 sections, so I can make
This
a
time of year it always is.
proper recommendation. I seem to always mess up this recommendation.
Okay,
The what?
you can do it.
I'm gonna try to do this omnibus. I like your term, recommendation. So,
It's not my turn. It's in the dictionary somewhere.
I'm sure.
Like Chris just made it up.
So, all right, so. Glasses help.
So we're looking for
Just think it through.
GH and
I
I.
got it.
Think it
So,
through.
the administration recommends approval of curriculum items reflected in schedules G1 through G3, personnel changes reflected in schedules H1 through H8, and business items reflected in schedules I1 through I6.
Can I have a motion? Ms. Felice, seconded by? Mr. Barry, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Any more cards? Anybody have closing remarks?
I do. Today is Beth Doyle's last board meeting, so I
Hey.
wish you well.
Hey.
So-
We're not clapping because we're happy to see you go. We're
Yeah,
happy.
yeah, so, many blessings to you in your new role.
Yeah,
We'll miss you.
it's coming up, right?
You
Fourth
will.
is your first day?
Yeah, next week.
Fifth? Oh, so the fourth's your last day. Got it. Okay. Without further ado, a motion to adjourn. Ms. Kavanaugh, seconded by Mr. Barry. All those in favor? We stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a nice night.